The United States military has just made a move that no one expected to come this fast, this decisively, and on this scale. Thousands of Marines are being rushed to the Middle East, weeks ahead of schedule. Warships are cutting through the Pacific. Amphibious assault vessels are sailing at full steam. And the question on everyone's mind is the same. Is America about to send ground troops into Iran? This is not a drill. This is not a routine deployment. This is one of the most significant military buildups the world has seen in over 2 decades, and it is happening right now, in real time. Stay with me, because in the next few minutes I am going to break down exactly what is happening, why it matters, what the stakes are, and what could come next. This story touches every corner of the globe, from the Strait of Hormuz to the streets of Tehran, from Washington, D.C. to Beijing, and from the oil markets of the world to the kitchen tables of ordinary Americans. Let's get into it. The United States military is deploying thousands of additional Marines and sailors to the Middle East, and this comes as the U.S.-Israeli war on Iran has now crossed the 3-week mark. The deployments center around the USS Boxer, an amphibious assault ship, along with its 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit and accompanying warships. That is a massive, highly capable fighting force, and it is moving fast. The 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit, made up of at least 2,200 Marines, set off from San Diego aboard the amphibious assault ship USS Boxer, sooner than expected. Reuters reported that the troops departed the U.S. about 3 weeks ahead of schedule. 3 weeks ahead of schedule. Let that sink in. When a military force of this size is rushed out weeks early, something serious is driving that urgency. The Pentagon does not accelerate deployments of this magnitude without a reason, and it does not stop there. The deployment includes elements of the 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit, based at Camp Pendleton near San Diego, and elements of the USS Boxer Amphibious Ready Group. The Boxer, a Wasp-class amphibious assault ship, can also carry F-35B Lightning II attack jets with vertical takeoff and landing capability, along with attack and transport helicopters. This is not just boots on a boat. This is a floating fortress, capable of projecting air power, launching amphibious raids, seizing coastlines, and inserting special operations forces deep into hostile territory with minimal warning. The firepower aboard the USS Boxer alone is staggering. The group also includes the amphibious landing docks USS Portland and USS Comstock, which were already at sea off the coast of California. And the USS Boxer group is only part of the story. The move comes after the Pentagon last week ordered the USS Tripoli Amphibious Ready Group and 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit to transit from the Pacific Ocean off Japan to the Middle East. The 31st MEU includes about 2,500 Marines. So when you add it all up, we are talking about 2 separate Marine Expeditionary Units, multiple amphibious assault ships, destroyer escorts, landing docks, and thousands upon thousands of combat-ready Marines, all converging on the same theater at the same time. The additional deployments will add to the 50,000 U.S. troops already in the Middle East and would bring 2 Marine Expeditionary Units to the region. 50,000 troops, and now thousands more are on the way. To understand why this deployment is so significant, you need to understand the chain of events that led to this moment. Beginning in late January 2026, the United States carried out its largest military buildup in the Middle East since the 2003 invasion of Iraq, deploying air, naval, and missile defense assets amid escalating tensions with Iran, which the United States attributed to Iran's nuclear program, the 2025-2026 Iranian protests, and a government crackdown that killed thousands of demonstrators. On 28 February 2026, this culminated in a series of joint military strikes in Iran by the United States and Israel, sparking the 2026 Iran war. And from that point forward, the conflict has been escalating steadily, week by week. Throughout February 2026, U.S. officials signaled plans for an expanded carrier presence. On 13 February, sources stated that USS Gerald R. Ford was en route to the Middle East, creating an uncommon 2-carrier deployment in the theater at a time of heightened tensions with Iran. Reports from multiple outlets noted that this concentration of U.S. air and naval assets constituted one of the most significant force postures in the region since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. That comparison to 2003 is not made lightly. The Iraq invasion reshaped the entire Middle East. It cost trillions of dollars, thousands of American lives, and hundreds of thousands of civilian casualties. The fact that military analysts are already drawing that parallel tells you something about the scale and potential consequences of what is unfolding now. The U.S. has carried out strikes against 7,000 targets inside Iran and hit more than 40 Iranian mine-laying vessels and 11 submarines, the Pentagon says. 7,000 targets. That is an extraordinary number. This is not a pinprick campaign. This is a sustained, systematic, large-scale air and naval war, and it has been going on for weeks. The deployments would mark an escalation in the conflict, during which at least 13 U.S. service members have been killed and approximately 200 wounded. American blood has already been spilled. That changes the political and emotional calculus in ways that are very hard to walk back. Now here is where things get interesting, and frankly more than a little confusing. President Donald Trump, when asked directly by reporters whether he was sending more troops to the Middle East, said, and I quote, "No, I'm not putting troops anywhere." Trump said, "I'm not putting troops anywhere," before adding, "If I were, I certainly wouldn't tell you," and continued that the U.S. will do whatever's necessary to keep the price of oil down. So the president publicly denies sending troops, while the Pentagon is quietly accelerating the deployment of thousands of Marines, weeks ahead of schedule, on multiple amphibious assault ships. Trump on Friday posted on Truth Social that we are getting very close to meeting our objectives as we consider winding down our great military efforts in the Middle East. Winding down, while simultaneously speeding up a Marine deployment. These two things cannot both be entirely true at the same time. And that gap between public messaging and military action is something analysts and journalists around the world are scrutinizing very closely right now. A Pentagon official told The Hill that due to Operation Security, it does not discuss future or hypothetical movements. U.S. Central Command, which manages forces in the Middle East, also declined to comment, as it will not speculate on future force posture or discuss movements that are not in our area of operation. Silence from the Pentagon, denials from the White House, and Marines on ships sailing faster than planned. That is a pattern that military historians recognize. It is the pattern of a government preparing for something it is not yet ready to announce publicly. The Pentagon's decision to send the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit, a 2,200-troop force, to the Middle East is fueling new speculation about whether the conflict with Iran could involve U.S. ground troops, a step that would mark a dramatic escalation and potentially push the already unpopular war into a far more dangerous phase. Let's be precise about what a Marine Expeditionary Unit is designed to do. These are not garrison forces. They are not peacekeepers. They are not there to hold a base and wait. An MEU is a rapid, self-contained, combat-ready force that can storm beaches, seize islands, conduct raids deep into hostile territory, and establish a foothold where none existed before. They are purpose-built for exactly the kind of high-risk, high-reward operations that are now being discussed openly in Washington. Those options include securing the Strait of Hormuz, potentially by deploying U.S. forces to Iran's shoreline. The Strait of Hormuz. About 1/5 of the world's oil flows through that narrow stretch of water. If Iran, or Iranian-aligned forces, managed to close or seriously disrupt that strait, the economic consequences would be felt everywhere on Earth. Oil prices would skyrocket, supply chains would buckle, and the global economy, already fragile, could take a devastating hit. Oil remains above $100 a barrel, with Reuters saying prices are hovering around $108, amid wider concern that attacks on Gulf energy facilities and near shutdown conditions persist. $108 a barrel. That is already being felt at gas stations across America. And if the strait closes, that number could go dramatically higher. Then there is Karg Island. With 2 amphibious ready groups heading to the Middle East, there is increasing speculation that the U.S. will try to seize Iran's strategic Karg Island. The Trump administration has also discussed options to send ground forces to Iran's Karg Island, the hub for 90% of Iran's oil exports. 90% of Iran's oil exports flow through one island. If the United States were to seize that island, even temporarily, it would devastate Iran's economy and potentially force Tehran to the negotiating table. But it would also be an act of war on Iranian soil in the most literal sense. And holding that island against Iranian counterattacks would be extraordinarily dangerous. According to commentary from military analysts, seizing Karg Island would be a huge deal and would be a risky operation. Not just the seizing, but more so the staying. If Iran thought it was lost, they could bombard it with pretty much everything they have. That is the dilemma at the heart of this entire crisis. The military options are real. The Marines have the capability. But the consequences of executing those options are almost impossible to fully predict or control. There is another dimension to this story that is not getting nearly enough attention, and it should concern every strategist and policymaker in Washington. The 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit is primarily based in Japan, where it routinely trains with the Japanese self-defense forces on skills in high demand across the Pacific, including rapidly seizing small islands. Their removal from the region removes one of the primary ground combat elements in the Pacific, which could respond to a crisis with China or North Korea. This is the strategic gamble embedded in this decision. By pulling 2 Marine Expeditionary Units away from the Pacific and rushing them to the Middle East, the United States is making a bet, a very large bet, that China will not choose this moment of American distraction to make a move on Taiwan, and that North Korea will stay quiet, and that no other flashpoint in Asia will suddenly ignite. History suggests that adversaries are very good at identifying and exploiting moments of distraction. The timing of any potential Chinese action across the Taiwan Strait, should it ever come, would almost certainly be chosen for exactly this kind of moment, when American forces are stretched and committed elsewhere. The United States military is immensely powerful, but it is not infinitely large. And every asset committed to one theater is an asset that cannot be in another theater at the same time. The rest of the world is watching this very carefully, and not all of them like what they see. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi warned at the 62nd Munich Security Conference that any war involving Iran would have consequences across the entire region, stressing that escalating tensions could destabilize the broader Middle East. China has its own strategic interests at stake here. Iran is a major supplier of oil to China, and Beijing has been developing deeper economic and strategic ties with Tehran. A U.S. military victory that fundamentally reshapes Iran's government or dismantles its military would be seen in Beijing as a direct threat to Chinese interests and influence. France urged Tehran to accept negotiations and make concessions to avert war. Europe, meanwhile, is deeply uncomfortable with the direction of this conflict. European governments that spent years trying to preserve the nuclear deal with Iran are now watching as that entire diplomatic architecture is shattered by bombs and warships. India reduced purchases of Iranian oil amid sanctions pressure and enforcement actions targeting Tehran's shadow fleet, with Indian authorities in February 2026 seizing multiple vessels linked to illicit Iranian oil shipments. Even India, which has long tried to maintain good relations with both Washington and Tehran, is being pulled into alignment with U.S. policy because the economic pressure of sanctions and the risk of secondary sanctions is simply too great to ignore. And there is a chilling intelligence dimension to all of this. In March 2026, it was reported by ABC News that the U.S. recently acquired information that as of early February 2026, Iran allegedly aspired to conduct a surprise attack using unmanned aerial vehicles from an unidentified vessel off the coast of the United States homeland, specifically against unspecified targets in California. Drone attacks against California. If that intelligence is accurate, and U.S. officials clearly believe it is serious enough to act on, it means this conflict is not confined to the Middle East. It has potential implications for the American homeland itself. Back home in the United States, the politics of this situation are deeply complicated for President Trump. Any use of U.S. ground troops, even for a limited mission, could pose significant political risks for Trump, given low support among the American public for the Iran campaign, and Trump's own pre-election promises to avoid entangling the U.S. in new Middle East conflicts. A Reuters Ipsos poll that closed on Thursday found that some 65% of Americans believe Trump will order troops into a large-scale ground war in Iran, and just 7% support that idea. 7%. That is a remarkable number. Only 7% of Americans support a ground war in Iran. And yet the Marines are sailing, the ships are moving, the forces are positioning. This is the central tension of the moment. The military logic of deploying these forces is clear. They expand options, they create leverage, they send signals. But the political logic is dangerous. If those Marines go ashore in Iran or on Karg Island or on the Iranian coastline along the Strait of Hormuz, the political consequences at home could be severe. Trump won the presidency in part on a message of not getting America dragged into new foreign wars. If this becomes a ground war in Iran, that promise will be impossible to defend. It could take up to 2 weeks or the end of March before the 31st MEU is in place. A Marine Expeditionary Unit can deliver an initial surge of troops quickly, but seizing and holding key terrain or sustaining a prolonged fight would almost certainly require a far larger ground force. So by the end of March, which is days away, the United States will have 2 Marine Expeditionary Units positioned in or near the Gulf. That is roughly 4,500 to 5,000 Marines aboard multiple amphibious assault ships, capable of launching operations on very short notice. Experts say the MEU would likely be used to conduct raids on targets along the Iranian coast, including Iranian fortifications that could interfere with convoy operations through the strait. Raids, not occupation, not a full-scale invasion, but raids, precise, fast, targeted operations designed to neutralize specific threats, clear mines, destroy fortifications, and keep the oil flowing. That is the scenario that seems most likely in the near term. But the gap between raids and full-scale ground war can close very quickly, very unexpectedly, when things go wrong on the ground. History has taught us that lesson over and over again. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has projected no quick end to the campaign. Official Defense Department messaging has described the mission as laser-focused on destroying Iran's offensive missile capacity, missile production, navy, and security infrastructure. No quick end. That phrase from the Defense Secretary is one of the most important things said publicly about this conflict. It tells you that the people running this war do not believe it is going to be over in days or weeks. They are planning for a sustained campaign. Here is where we stand right now. The United States has deployed 50,000 troops to the Middle East. It is now rushing thousands more Marines on multiple warships 3 weeks ahead of schedule. It has struck 7,000 targets inside Iran. It has lost 13 service members with 200 more wounded. Oil prices are at $108 a barrel. The Strait of Hormuz is under threat. Karg Island, which handles 90% of Iran's oil exports, is being discussed as a potential target for U.S. ground forces. And the President of the United States is saying publicly, "I'm not sending troops anywhere." This is a moment of enormous consequence. The decisions made in the next few days and weeks, in Washington, in Tehran, in Tel Aviv, and on the bridges of those ships now crossing the Pacific, will shape the trajectory of this conflict, the stability of the global oil market, and the lives of thousands of people in uniform and out of it. The Marines are moving, the world is watching, and whatever comes next, it will not be small. If you want to stay on top of this story as it develops, make sure you are subscribed. Share this with someone who needs to understand what is actually happening right now in the Middle East. And leave a comment below. I want to hear your thoughts on where you think this goes from here. I'll see you in the next one.